Welcome back to another introduction for the Met free streams that they're offering so generously during the time that we're unable to assemble in the theaters. We miss you dreadfully, and we cannot wait to be performing for you live in a group, whatever that form may be. I know we're about to enter some sort of new normal when it comes to performance, and who knows what that will be. But let's not think about that now. Let's just think about tonight's opera. I'm Carol Anderson. I'm principal coach of the Utah Opera. So somehow it already became June, and it's June 1st, and we're coming up on the 12th week of Met Opera offerings. We're starting this week off with I Puritani, the Puritans, by Vincenzo Bellini. Now, if you've listened to these talks on a reasonably regular basis, I apologize for any repeated information, but for those of you who are just joining us, I always want to review the basics. So Vincenzo Bellini was born in 1801 and died very young at the age of 34 in 1835. He is one of three composers who sort of dominated Italian opera at the beginning of the 19th century. The other two are Gaetano Donizetti and Gioacchino Rossini. So at the time of his death, Vincenzo Bellini had only written 10 operas. I say only, but that's in comparison to Rossini, who at the same age had written 39, and Donizetti at the age of 34 had written 35. So he was much less prolific than those two guys. But it doesn't mean that he couldn't write quickly when pressed, and that's kind of what we see in this case. Bellini's partner for 7 of his operas was the great librettist Felice Romani, Italy's most respected theatrical poet of the early 19th century. However, I Puritani, which was to be his last, though not planned that way, was created to a libretto by a novice poet, Count Carlo Pepoli. Pepoli and Bellini met at the salon of the exiled Italian princess Belgioioso. I love to say her name because that means beautifully joyous. So I hope she was always cheerful. If she wasn't, that would have been super ironic. So Princess Belgioioso hosted a salon where many Italian revolutionaries would gather in Paris. So it was a lot of expats. At this time, we had not seen Italy united into a single country. That sort of happens around the 1840s, 1850s. And of course, Verdi becomes the unofficial poster child for the movement to unify Italy. But they were still working towards that. So the Italian revolutionaries would congregate at Princess Belgioioso's salon. I just had to say it again because I love it. Much of the information about the creation of this opera comes from Bellini's letters to a lifelong friend, Francesco Florimo, I'm not really sure where the accent falls. His contract to write an opera for the Théâtre Italien in Paris was for the last quarter of 1834, and it turned out to be extremely lucrative, which was nice for him. In a letter to Florimo of the 11th of March, 1834, Bellini expressed some frustration, noting, "I am about to lose my mind over the plot of the opera for Paris, as it has been impossible to find a suitable subject for my purpose and adaptable to the company." Pepoli presented several subjects for consideration, and Bellini finally chose to work with an 1833 play about Cromwell and the English Civil War of the 17th century. Bellini's great work with Romani paid off when he worked with this novice writer. He was able to help the process along by condensing the action to a manageable number of scenes, and he went ahead and changed the names from the sort of unmelodious English names to the more singable Italian versions of all those character names. The opera was composed in about 6 months, which seemed pretty quick for Bellini, and it was ready for rehearsals to begin in late December. Now, Bellini and Rossini had gotten to know each other in Paris. If you remember any history about Rossini, he moved to Paris and then composed some Italian-style opera, but in French. So William Tell was one of the most famous ones of that nature, and Le Conte, the comedy. He stayed in Paris most of his life, even after his retirement from opera, which happened quite quickly. And so when Bellini moved to Paris, he met Rossini and got to know the great maestro. His great respect for Rossini, in fact, led Bellini to present the score to Rossini for his approval, the maestro's approval. It was upon Rossini's advice after the final dress that the opera was changed from 2 acts to 3, And Rossini suggested that the second act end with the great duet Suoni la tromba, this trumpet sounds, which is an exciting martial duet for two basses. Rossini thought it would lead to an extremely enthusiastic ovation, and of course he wasn't wrong. Partly because it was martial in awe and so patriotic and so exciting. It's kind of a big pep rally tune. The dress rehearsal took place on the 20th of January in 1834. It was attended by, according to accounts, all of high society, all the great artists, and everyone most distinguished in Paris were in the theater, enthusiastic. Bellini's ecstatic letter to Florimo, which followed the dress rehearsal, recounts the wildly enthusiastic reception of many of the numbers throughout the performance, most especially that patriotic and exciting second act bass duet. So that by its end, the end of the opera, he says in his account, the French had all gone mad. There was such noise and such shouts that they themselves were astonished at being so carried away. In a word, my dear Florimo, I should look that up. It was an unheard of thing, and since Saturday, Paris have spoken of it in amazement. I showed myself to the audience, which shouted as if insane, how satisfied am I? Bellini, Rossini, and Donizetti, as a matter of review, composed in the style of beautiful singing or bel canto, which was prevalent in Italian style opera from the 17th century into the 19th century. Bel canto is characterized by long spun-out melodic lines that are quite beautiful, along with virtuosic displays of high notes and runs and fast notes and arpeggios. So really all of the vocal tricks that a human can do would be exhibited in bel canto opera. The bel canto singer has to be fearless and have a flawless technique that he or she can rely on in any sort of situation. Bellini wrote to Ferlito, a different correspondent, on April 11th, when the year before the opera premiered, with the great news that the four of his favorite singers were going to be available for this premiere. And just like Bellini created the opera for those four singers, anyone who mounts I Puritani or La Sonnambula, which we saw a couple of nights ago, or Norma, really has that soprano in place. They don't decide to do I Puritani and then go hunting for a soprano. They find the soprano and then they create the production around her usually. And the tenor is also an incredibly demanding part in I Puritani. As in pretty much every opera of this style, you're going to hear a lot of solita forma, or the usual form, which is those two-part arias, recitative, that sets the scene, the cavatina, which is the long legato spun out slow part with the lyrical melodic lines, and then a tempo di mezzo, which changes where the scene is going, and then the big finale cabaletta, which is fast and usually quite virtuosic with lots of spectacular fireworks, vocal fireworks as we want to say. The opera begins at the fortress of Plymouth, which is a Puritan stronghold, and it's currently under siege by royalist troops. So the English Civil War was between the royalist supporters of King Charles, who is deceased during this opera, and Cromwell, who was the leader of the Puritans. Elvira is the daughter of the house. Her father, Giorgio, is the lord of the fortress of Plymouth. Elvira is betrothed to the Puritan leader, Sir Richard IV, otherwise known as Riccardo, but is in love with the royalist supporter Arturo. Elvira is very deeply saddened to have to marry someone she doesn't love. Oh, but before that, we have an opening chorus where there is religious music coming from within the fortress, and this is kind of the chorus praying for the deliverance from the royalist forces outside their gates. It's very chorale-like and hymn-like. And we have a campana, which is a bell, off stage as well, plus organ. And then the character says, "Oh, warriors of Cromwell, pray with your heart and your mind in these songs for our deliverance." And then everyone comes in and comments on this in a really beautiful quintet. So Elvira is moping about. We see from the beginning that Elvira is a little bit of a delicate flower, which explains why she goes a little nuts towards the middle and end of the opera. But I get ahead of myself. So Elvira is moping about because she wants to marry Arturo, but she is unable to because of her family's loyalties. Her uncle convinces her father to let her marry Arturo out of just pity for his nephew. Ricardo is very noble in this case as well, but just mourns the fact that he will not find love. So he says there's a little bit of a energetic opening. And this is where Ricardo comes in. And then he says, where can I flee? Where could I hide myself from the horrible fate? And that's the horrible fate of not being able to marry the woman he loves, Elvira. So he talks about his soul is full of bitter tears. And he says, "O Elvira, my gentle breath, forever I have lost you. Without hope of love in this life, what remains to me?" So he's very sad. And there's a little bit of a lyrical moment. This is not the full-on cavatina at this point, but it's a lyrical interlude before the cavatina. In there where the chorus comes in and then he sings his main aria, "A per sempre io ti perderei, fior d'amore," flower of love. And it's very sad. And then it's got the cabaletta as well, where he has more adventurous fireworks. So I talked about the tenor being a very crazy role as well as the sopranos. Arturo is a very, very high role. In his aria, "A te o cara," he is singing of his love for Elvira prior to their wedding. And I'm going to play a little bit of the second verse. The second verse ornaments the ideas of the first verse in the cavatina. And throws in some crazy high notes. Some of the higher notes that you'll see written. Sometimes singers will interpolate based on tradition and scholarship, higher notes, high notes in other arias, but this one has actually quite high notes written out. So it's got, we always talk about the tenor's high C. This actually goes up to high D flat or high C sharp. So here's the second verse. Fireworks that are going to be fast and rapid and popping up and down in the range, but it has lots of ornamentation written in. Often Bellini is compared or referred to kind of as considered a vocal version of Chopin, and Chopin is that great composer who wrote at the same time, and he wrote these long spun out beautiful melodies for piano. And you can listen to some Chopin and listen to some Bellini and see if you see some similarities, but definitely the long spun out melodies are kind of a hallmark of both of those. And also the simple accompaniments, which give primacy in the case of Bellini to the vocal line. So, for instance, this Il mio tormento, where he's talking about, I remember my torment, but now I'm happy. He says, it can be something. That could be the simple melody, but it's decorated. And so it makes it a lot more exciting and lovely. So, and then Elvira's deeply happy. She comes in and she needs help getting ready. So she finds, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Arturo discovers that imprisoned in the castle is Queen Henrietta, who is the widow of Charles I. So he determines that he needs to help her out, and the opportunity presents itself. Elvira comes in and sings a Polonaise, and that's where I usually diverge into the Chopin conversation, because he wrote a number of piano polonaises with that sort of martial rhythm. Polonaise means it comes from a Polish dance, yum, in the meter of 3 with that rhythm. So she sings this aria where she's just saying, I'm just a happy girl, everything's amazing, and like a lily of April. Sorry if I coughed and that was something, a little booger, throat booger. That's the problem with this new light. Everything is revealed and nothing can be hidden. So anyway, so she comes in and she needs help getting her hair ready. So she takes her veil off and kind of playfully drapes it on Queen Henrietta. And Arturo says, what a great idea. The light bulb goes off and he thinks, well, I can swathe her in this veil and I can help her get away. So he helps her escape and abandons Elvira, somewhat at the altar. They're not quite there, but Elvira, being the fragile flower that she is, kind of loses it here and descends into the madness of grief. So then when we next see Arturo, we discover he's been condemned to death by Parliament as a royalist supporter. And Elvira is wandering, lost in the happy memories. She comes, first we hear her from off stage. And this is a little bit like the idea of Lucia, and that there are people commenting on her madness and watching her and unable to help. The good news is there hasn't been a murder at this point. So she doesn't come in covered in blood like Lucia does in that sort of iconic moment with the white nightgown and the blood everywhere. But she is wandering in a sad state, thinking of, or she's actually in a happy state, because in her madness, she's forgotten what's really going on and she just remembers the happy times. So we have a little bit of kind of a taste from off stage. This will happen off stage. It says di dentro, which means within, meaning in the wings. This melody will come back in the aria proper. Giorgio and Riccardo are watching and they say, oh, she's coming here. Do you hear her? Oh, how grave is the sound of her laments. So we get these little under their breath kind of comments on what's happening. And one of the things you'll probably hear in that opening is a real spectacular use of piano. It's pianissimo. So floating these high tones. This is another one of those kind of vocal party tricks that bel canto is a great vehicle for display. So then we have the aria. This gentle voice called me and then disappeared. Here he swore eternal faith, to be faithful, and then cruelly he fled me. So she's reliving the sad times. But then In the second part, in the cabaletta, she is full on happy. She says, "Vien diletto in ciel la luna," come delightful one. The moon is in the heavens. Everything's quiet around us, and it's just kind of, and we're in evening, and it's romantic. So I'm going to play a little bit of that, and then I might demonstrate kind of how some ornamentation might happen. Generally a faster tempo, and that's a stylistic thing that people have to just know and expect. You just learn sort of along the way that that's part of a hallmark is the push and pull. We call it rubato. We steal for the tempo and go slower, and then we have to get back. That's a cadenza, the orchestra's. And then we have a little interlude, which is there partially for the soprano to rest and also to give the other people have a chance to comment on her. Can you, beautiful, unhappy one, have pity for that one, for such love? They're saying, please, let's have pity for this poor woman. Then when we get to the second part, you might hear something, for instance, instead of these descending scales, it sometimes goes to chromatics, which are a fun, I like to say party trick. I'm saying that again. So it. So you'll hear that instead of. You'll hear. And then there's that spectacular D flat arpeggio, or E flat 7 arpeggio that goes up to the D flat. So again, we're seeing that the both our leads are in the stratosphere quite often, and then they also have to carry these beautiful lyrical lines in the middle high register. So then I told you about the big pep rally tune. After this mad scene, Giorgio convinces Riccardo that Elvira needs their help, and so they unite together in a fervent patriotic duet. And it says, the trumpet is sounding, and fearlessly I will pugnero, attack with strength. Bello è affrontar la morte. It is wonderful to face death, gridando libertà, shouting liberty. So it's a bass and a baritone. It's exciting to hear those low voices in close harmony, just buzzing and carrying on those wonderful tunes. And then they go on, there's a middle section, and then they sing in big duet, and it's quite virile and, manly. Let's go to war, because it's really cool, as often happened back then. So then last thing I want to talk about before we get to the end of the story. So Arturo does come back to Plymouth, which is terribly dangerous for him because he is a wanted man now. And he reassures Elvira, who's still wandering a little bit confused, of his affection. The soldiers do rush in, however, to arrest Arturo because they all get the news that the royalists have been defeated. And Arturo is sentenced to death, as is supposed to happen. So as everyone is talking, having their comments. It's one of those quintets where kind of everything stops, or one of those ensembles where everything stops, and everyone comments on what's happening. So the chorus is saying, vendetta s'affretti, Dio lo vuole, e Dio lo vuol, vendetta s'affretti. Hurry to vengeance, God wills it. And then Elvira is saying, oh, my Arturo, I lose you. For me, you're dying, because he came back to her. Oh no. And then Ricordo is saying, cessate un istante perfidi. They're saying, stop. This is a terrible moment. Mute to pity. Sorde a pietà. So they're upset that there's no mercy. And then Arturo is noble, but he says he's only thinking of Elvira. Ella è tremante e l'aspirante. She is trembling. She is breathless. Anime perfide. Sorde a pietà. That's where he's saying they're deaf to pity. Riccardo and Giorgio are saying cessate. Have a moment. This is a terrible moment. You should have some pity. So Riccardo and Giorgio are on the side of Arturo. It's just the chorus and the rest of the folks that are hungry for his royalist blood. Now, this is one of the notes. This is a little bit into the ensemble. He's had some solo bits until then, and now he's singing it with everybody's accompaniment. But there is one of the highest notes I've ever seen written in a score. And this is an easy soprano note, but it is not an easy tenor note. It is, you can look at all of those. It's backwards, I know, but look at all of those ledger lines. Whoever does that. So this is a high F. So I suppose that there's probably been over history a alternate note that's been done, and I don't know what we're going to hear tonight, but it'd be fun if we heard that crazy note, wouldn't it? There's a crazy high note like that in the Lucia duet with Edgardo and Lucia in the first act. So there's a couple of instances of these really amazing things that you have to do a sort of really special vocal technique to make it work out. It's not going to sound like a Nessun Dorma high note. So... that's already plenty high. Everyone's very sad. They think Arturo's going to die. Elvira is still messed up because she thinks she's losing him once again. And this time it's her fault because he came back for her. A herald shows up and brings great news. Turns out that Cromwell's government has declared amnesty for all royalist supporters. And so we're all really good. So Elvira finally returns to sanity and everybody rejoices in love and delight. So that is I Puritani. I'm grateful to get to know this opera a little bit before you, so I hope you enjoy tonight's performance. Thank you for your support of the arts here or wherever you may be, whether it's here in Utah or elsewhere in the state. We appreciate it. We're grateful for our longtime supporters and members of the Utah Opera family, Judy Brady and Drew Browning, who are wonderful friends to the opera and are making these broadcasts or this digital content available on YouTube and Facebook. So until we see you again in our theater, please remain safe, take care of one another, and keep washing your hands. Thank you so much. Have a great night.